Okay, hello everyone. Welcome to the 19th Annual Cameron Hollier Memorial Lecture. I'm Cliff Goldfarb, the chair of the Friends of the Arthur Conan Doyle Collection at the Toronto Reference Library. I'd like to welcome all of you today. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good night, wherever you are, because we have people from all around the world who are joining us today. This is our first virtual Hollier lecture. A year ago, if I'd said that our lecture next year was going to be on Zoom, I'm sure most of you would have said, what the heck is he talking about? Now I'm sure almost all of you are completely accustomed to Zoom webinars and programs, and it's become, I guess, the new way of life. Well, it's nice to have the convenience of participating in these activities from a comfortable seat in your own home. I'm also sure that most of you are eagerly looking forward to a time when you can again be part of a large gathering without fear and without a mask. The good news is that our friends from far away can be at our Hollier lecture this year. So this event usually serves as our annual meeting. So I'm going to take just a few moments, a very few moments, to tell you a little bit about the Friends and what we do. Cameron Hollier was the founding curator of the collection. The collection opened in 1971 at the Metropolitan Toronto Central Library on St. George Street. It's now in a new location where it's been for almost 45 years at Bloor and Young in Toronto. In 2002, to honor Cameron's memory, the Friends established an annual lecture to celebrate and recognize Cameron's preeminent role as our founding curator. The Friends were formed in 1997 by a small group who wanted to find a formal way to help the collection to grow and become an even more valuable resource for Conan Doyle scholars, for the library, and for the City of Toronto. We are part of the Toronto Public Library Foundation, who provide us with a home and a great deal of support. We also receive great support from the American Foundation for the Toronto Public Library. We work with the library to enhance the collection and to act as a resource for the library on issues that may come up. We raise funds to purchase rare items for special projects and to enhance the collection and its facilities. We work to raise public consciousness of the collection, and we act as a resource together with the library staff in dealing with other public and private collections. We work with the Bootmakers of Toronto, our local Sherlock Holmes Society, and other organizations worldwide to promote the appreciation of Arthur Conan Doyle and his works. We're one of the very few societies in the world dedicated to Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, rather than his most famous creation. In fact, we actually have more members outside of Canada than inside. We publish 3 issues of our newsletter, Magic Door, each year. Our latest issue is going to be mailed out in the next few weeks. I want to thank the former editors of Magic Door, Dana Noon and Donald Zalden, who have retired after many years. We have a new editor, Tom Yu, of the Department of English at Dalhousie University, and himself a former Hollier lecturer on Sherlock Holmes and Shakespeare. Each fall, we publish the previous year's annual Hollier lecture. This year, we'll be sending our 2019 lecture by Martin Edwards, author of criminal fiction, president of the Detection Club, and chair of the Crime Writers Association, In Sherlock's Footsteps, the connection between Sherlock Holmes and the Detection Club. Today's lecture will be published next year. We're planning an event for the weekend of Saturday, September 25, next September, to celebrate the 50th anniversary of the establishment of the collection. Given the current situation, we're not yet certain if this can be a live event, but keep checking our website for updates. We help the collection to purchase items which are not within its budget. We've purchased or contributed to the purchase of several very important additions to the collection. We're always interested in receiving gifts or bequests for which the foundation can issue a charitable tax receipt. We work with the American Foundation, for the Toronto Public Library to offer our American friends the opportunity to receive charity tax treatment for their gifts to support the collection. The American Friends, and especially their past president, Glenn Moranker, have helped us to make several major manuscript purchases for the collection. And I'm happy to mention that our speaker today, Rebecca Romney, serves on the board of the American Friends. I want to thank the members of our executive who work behind the scenes to carry out our activities. Our website at acdfriends.org is maintained by Doug Elliott, who manages to keep it up to date from his home in Sydney, Australia. I can't thank him enough for his dedication and his wise counsel. I want to thank our Vice Chair, Barbara Rush, our Secretary and Merchandise Chair, Philip Elliott, our Treasurer, Peter Chant, and our Membership Secretary, Kathy Burns. Especially want to thank Mike Ranieri, who's head of the Bootmakers of Toronto, our local Sherlock Holmes Society, who helps us in many ways, including graphic design, and who is hosting this seminar today. And I thank the Toronto Public Library Foundation, especially Jennifer Jones, its president, and all of its hardworking staff for all of the material support and encouragement they have given us over the years. It is very much appreciated. Finally, thank you to the special collections staff who are responsible for our wonderful Arthur Conan Doyle collection. Allison Lennox, the manager of service development, special collections, our former curator, Peggy Perdue, now the Senior Department Head of Special Collections, for their constant advice and support, and our curator, Jessie Amalo, for the enthusiasm and skill she brings to her position every day. You'll hear from her in a bit. You can visit us on our Facebook page, where there's always a lively discussion or two, and our new YouTube channel, where today's lecture will be posted in the next few weeks, and you can find both from the links on our website. I invite you to consider becoming a member of the Friends. You'll find all of the information you need at www.acdfriends.org. Click on Become a Friend. You can also find us from the link on our Facebook page. Unfortunately, the reference library, as with all branches of the Toronto Public Library, is currently on COVID-19 lockdown and not open to visitors for at least the next 3 weeks. To give you an idea of the charm of the room and what treasures can be found in it, here is a teaser from our curator, Jessie Amalo.
Housed at the Toronto Reference Library, the Arthur Conan Doyle Collection is one of the world's largest research collections devoted to Arthur Conan Doyle's life and works. Many of our 25,000 items relate to Conan Doyle's most famous character, Sherlock Holmes. It also has a range of Conan Doyle's fiction and nonfiction. Collection materials include manuscripts and correspondence, various editions and translations, parodies and pastiches, biographies, criticisms and bibliographies, periodicals, stage and screen adaptations, photographs, and collectibles. The collection was started in 1969 when a well-known Toronto book vendor sold the library a large collection of early detective fiction novels, many of which were by Arthur Conan Doyle. Cameron Hollier, a librarian in the Languages and Literature Department, became the first curator of the collection. There have been 4 collection curators since its beginnings. The first Arthur Conan Doyle Roman collection was built and opened to the public in 1971, located at the Toronto Central Library. Since then, the collection was brought to the Toronto Reference Library, where it permanently resides. The collection is supported by the Friends of the Arthur Conan Doyle Collection, a group of members who help the library to maintain, enhance, and raise awareness for the collection. There is also a local interest group known as the Bootmakers of Toronto that meet regularly at the library to discuss the Sherlock Holmes stories. The collection includes many early and rare editions of Conan Doyle's work, including the 1887 periodical Beaton's Christmas Annual, featuring the first ever Sherlock Holmes story, A Study in Scarlet. The Toronto Public Library is fortunate to have one that is complete with a cover. It also features a near complete run of the periodical The Strand magazine, where the majority of Sherlock Holmes stories were first published. It also holds one-of-a-kind manuscript materials such as short stories, plays, and correspondence. Some highlights include The Parish Magazine, a short story written by Conan Doyle the year of his death in 1930. The autographed manuscript was purchased in 2015 by the Friends of the Arthur Conan Doyle Collection. Another highlight includes several business correspondence between Arthur Conan Doyle and Greenhouse Smith, the editor of the Strand magazine, dating from 1893 to 1929. The collection also has non-book formats such as artwork, photographs, and collectibles. Examples include original illustrations such as the 1893 drawing by famous Holmes illustrator Sidney Paget for The Adventure of the Cardboard Box, spirit photographs taken by Conan Doyle, and artist books such as The Hound of the Baskervilles mini dog-shaped book by J&J Sabota Art Book Studio, in which the text is mounted as the teeth and tongue of a hound. The Arthur Conan Doyle room, styled as Sherlock Holmes' study, has books you can pull off the shelves and read. The collection is free and accessible to all. Items are non-circulating and can be viewed in the Marilyn and Charles Bailey Special Collections Center on the 5th floor of the Toronto Reference Library. Contact us to schedule talks and tours for groups and classes. We look forward to seeing you there.
Thank you, Jessie. Our hall-year lecturer today is Rebecca Romney. Rebecca is a rare book dealer based in Washington, D.C., where she co-founded the firm Type Punch Matrix. She's published a book on books, Printer's Error, Irreverent Stories from Book History, co-founded the Honey and Wax Prize, an annual award of $1,000 for the best book collection by a woman under 30 in the United States. And she was featured in last year's documentary, The Booksellers, about the antiquarian book trade, which was shown in the Hot Docs Film Festival here in Toronto last year. Since 2011, she has been the book specialist on the History Channel's television show Pawn Stars. She's the only regular woman expert on the show that airs in 150 countries and in 38 languages. Rebecca's work has appeared in Lit Hub, Crime Reads, Mental Floss, and The Atlantic, and she's given lectures at the Smithsonian, the New York Historical Society, the Rare Book School at the University of Virginia. A member of the Grolier Club and a book collector herself, her own collection of feminist science fiction association copies led to writing the introduction for the Feminist Press reissue of Judas Rose, part of Suzette Hayden Elgin's Forgotten feminist trilogy that anticipates Margaret Atwood's The Handmaid's Tale. Most recently, she edited Projections, an anthology of stories that predicted some aspect of life in 2020, which she compiled in part through researching examples in her own collection. Rebecca's a Sherlockian whose first Science Society meeting was at the Speckled Band in Boston before they'd opened membership to women, but during their second meeting of the year to which women were invited. The following year, she published her first article in the Baker Street Journal. She is a Copper Beech Smith, a member of the Five Orange Pips, and was invested in the Baker Street Irregulars as that gap on that second shelf, referring to the sales pitch Holmes gives Watson when disguised as an antiquarian book dealer in The Empty House. Rebecca is a board member and liaison to the Merrill Collection of Science Fiction for the American Friends of the Toronto Public Library. While Rebecca is speaking, you can click on the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen and send me a question for her to answer at the end of her talk, and we'll try to answer as many as we can. Rebecca, I'm turning it over to you.
Thank you, Cliff. Give me one moment here. I'm going to share my screen, and then we will be off. All right. So this lecture is going to be exactly as built. It is a tour of many creative collections built with some type of connection to Sherlock Holmes. But I'm also going to give away the underlying theme right up front. One of my goals in this lecture is to do a bit of myth busting about what book collecting is or what it can be. I came to this in part through my experience in co-founding a book collecting prize, which Cliff referenced. The Honey and Wax Prize is an award for an outstanding book collection. We created this for young women in the United States, age 30 and younger. And the reason we were inspired to create such an award is because we were constantly surprised at how many women and younger people felt uncomfortable identifying themselves as collectors. We would say like, oh, this is such a great addition to your collection. And they would respond like, oh no, I don't collect. I just gather things I like. So the formation of the prize was meant to encourage people to own their collecting habit and moreover, to celebrate it. So over the years, though, we ourselves were often surprised, as you can see in this panel here. The submissions showed such a range of creativity and ingenuity that they began opening up our own minds to reevaluating what makes a great collection. Because when people think of collecting, they often think of the imminent collections, like the biggest ones, the most expensive, the widest ranging. And it's as if our minds think in headlines and we only want the superlatives. But in the Sherlockian world, it's something like this one here from Peter Plow. Peter Plow is a collector based in Bethesda, Maryland. He's been collecting since the 1960s. And the breadth of his collection is astonishing. It's original first editions of the Holmes stories, pastiches, theater ephemera, magazine publications, art, advertising material, Holmes-themed objects like a brick from 221B, Sherlockian Society publications, items important to the history of the Baker Street Irregulars. If you don't know what some of those things are, like the word pastiche, don't worry, I'll get into more detail about them later. Suffice to say for now that Peter's collection has it all. It's so impressive, though. I think that just hearing it or hearing about it or seeing it can be intimidating. Like Peter is a collector. And what I have is just, a modest group of books. And so I think because our minds go to the superlative examples, we tend to defeat ourselves from the jump. And what I want to communicate in this lecture is that our definition of who gets to claim the title of collector is often too narrow. You don't have to be a collector like Peter Blau to proudly proclaim that you collect. And it doesn't have to be comprehensive like his. It can be whatever you want it to be. And that's the beauty of collecting. To me, there are two main criteria that distinguish a collection from, say, a library, or for the skeptical among you, distinguish it from hoarding. The first is that a collection is put together with intention and with some kind of conscious discipline. It's something you plan, and therefore something you have shaped parameters around. These parameters can be anything. You maybe collect different copies of only one title. Jen Aker, a collector in New York City, collects editions of Hound of the Baskervilles, her favorite Sherlock Holmes story. Or maybe you decided that you're only going to add to your collection by certain methods. That's another potential parameter. Jen doesn't search online for her editions. She just chose serendipity as her method, in fact, copies that she runs across when she visits bookstores in person. With such close proximity to the Strand and other great bookstores in New York City, she does have a leg up on that strategy, but that's part of the point. The act of collecting should be shaped by your tastes, your inclinations, and your life. For this reason, collecting is incredibly personal and can be deeply fulfilling. For many, a collection is a form of autobiography. Tiffany French picks up Sherlockian items as mementos while she's on vacation. Her collection, therefore, has become a travel memoir. That figure on the left is a cagagne. It's a pooping figure that appears for real in traditional nativity scenes in Catalonia. She picked it up when she was visiting Barcelona. And then on the right, there's a 221B sign there that she acquired in London. Similarly, Nahiko Kitahara, a collector based in Musashino City, Tokyo, has collected allergy pamphlets with a Holmes theme that he acquired from a hospital because he has seasonal allergies. Sometimes I'm not even sure we notice how autobiographical we're getting in our collecting. We pick something up because it interests us, and sometimes that's because there's some sort of personal connection hiding there in some form. Not always, but sometimes. Many collectors are drawn to material that reflects their own identity or where they're from. Gabriele Mazzoni, a collector based in Empoli, Italy, has a collection of the first the first appearances of the Holmes stories, including nearly every issue of the Strand magazine. This is a big feat, where this is where most of the short stories and the number of the novels first appeared. But the true marvel of his collection is actually the Italian appearances. He has many thousands of examples, and his collection borders on completeness. In the process of getting these, he's made some great scholarly discoveries, such as the fact that the first Holmes book in Italian was translated from the French of a Swiss edition and not directly from the English original. I wish I could spend more time just telling you about Gabriele's collection because it is incredible. So the second criterion that defines a dedicated collection is attention to format. Not all collectors are super picky about this, but the best collections engage with this concept in some fashion. I will say too, this is my opinion. It should not be taken as law, but I'm the one speaking, so I get to make the rules for this lecture. So for me, a library is composed of the texts that you acquire with the intention to read first and foremost. You may have a preference in format, like wanting to read a print book over an ebook, but you're less concerned about how you get access to that text than the ability to have that access for when you want to read. And that's not to say that you can't read the books in your collection, only that in a collection, you're consciously acquiring based on the principle that two different editions of Hannah the Baskervilles are just not the same thing, despite being the same text. So a library is a group you have gathered for the texts, and a collection is a group that you have gathered as historical artifacts that are also texts. A collection asks not solely why this text, but why this version of this text. Peter Blau told me that the day he became a collector was the first time he bought another version of a book he already had. It was the Hannah the Baskervilles, just like Jen Aker. These two were recognizing their collections as something distinct from their reading libraries. Now, in popular collecting, attention to format generally means hunting for first editions. That's the sort of well-known established myth that this is the only way to collect. But in fact, that's just one of many different ways to think about format. A good example comes from Glenn Moranker, a collector based in San Francisco and a board member of the Rare Book School at the University of Virginia. He has a number of different Sherlockian collections. Indeed, like Peter Blau's, his collection is rather famous in the Sherlockian world, but one of the collections within his larger collection is what I want to focus on. He collects piracies of original Holmes stories, that is, editions published without the authorization of the author and therefore without paying the author. Many of these piracies appeared in the United States during Conan Doyle's lifetime. The US was not very friendly to international copyright in the 19th century, having gotten into fights with the likes of Charles Dickens about their tendency to pirate books in order to support their democratic ideals of widely available literature cheaply sold to the masses, but also to support their own pocketbooks. One thing I like about this piracy collection is that these editions, being piracies and not first editions, don't actually cost much money to acquire at all. Glenn pointed out to me that there are currently 17 different editions of Holmes piracies available for under $25 on eBay right now. So they're a great example of how you can put together a compelling collection without emptying your pockets, and still a collection full of scholarly interest. A collection like this can be a jumping off point to research turn-of-the-century copyright law, or the development of American philosophical ideas regarding free access to information, which is very relevant these days, or marketing techniques of booksellers, all sorts of different angles. Denny Dobry, a collector based in Reading, Pennsylvania, pays attention to format in an entirely different manner. Denny has recreated Holmes's London flat 221B in his basement in rural Pennsylvania. This project is a true labor of love. Denny hasn't just been seeking to decorate it like a Victorian flat, but to fill it with items from the Victorian period. So as part of this project, Denny has included a bookshelf of books that Holmes is known to have read, thanks to references in the original stories. And he isn't acquiring just like any edition of Catullus, but specifically an 1892 edition, an edition that Holmes really might have had. And he even has a group of Watson's books that includes like 1890s issues of the British Medical Journal, which we know that he read thanks to the adventure of the stockbroker's clerk. You might also choose a format based on why you're collecting. Konstantin Rozakis, a collector based in New Jersey, focuses on primary source material. Now, this is a big ambition. It's one he's been equal to, though. He's put together not just one, but two complete runs of the Strand magazine Holmes appearances, which is a feat unmatched to my knowledge. But the focus on primary source materials also led him to the field of manuscripts. His collection has been of direct benefit to Sherlockian scholars, as one can see with a quick perusal of the Baker Street Irregulars manuscript series, which uses Conan Doyle's original manuscript to create a facsimile edition of one of the Holmes stories, which is then accompanied by scholarly essays. So the most recent publication, here we go, The Worst Man in London, uses the original manuscript of the Holmes story Charles Augustus Milverton from this collection. Okay, so I'm straying a little bit into intimidating collecting territory again. So allow me to show you an entirely different collection that was put together also for a specific purpose. Arthur J. Lay, a collector based in Berkeley, California, was once a literary scholar specializing in Italian literature and translation studies. A fan of the Holmes story since he was a child, thanks to the holdings of his local public library, shout out to public libraries, he drew on that interest specifically to help with his language study. Arthur told me, quote, "Reading something that has been translated from your native language into another is a bit like traveling to a parallel universe. Everything seems familiar, but somehow uncanny or off in a brain-tingly way. So I also started collecting translations of Sherlock Holmes related works into the languages that I was or am learning," end quote. So you can see that Arthur's collection isn't exactly about format, but it does think about what form the text is taking. So a slightly different approach, but illuminating in demonstrating how flexible collection can be according to your own needs, interests, and goals. Thinking actively about format also undermines typical assumptions about what it means to collect books. For most people involved in book collecting, the phrase isn't taken quite so literally. It's not just like books bound in codex format. It can be pamphlets or prints, ephemera, manuscripts, and more. Barbara Rush, a collector based in Toronto, has many different collections, including Victorian underwear, which she means literally underwear owned by Queen Victoria. But the one I'd like to talk about that she also has is marketing ephemera. Ephemera is the term used for printed or manuscript material that was never meant to survive. So postcards, theater tickets, posters, that type of thing. In her essay in the upcoming anthology of Sherlockian Collecting, edited by Rob Nunn, more on that later, Barbara explains the context for her collection of Victorian promotional items. Quote, "During the last quarter of the 19th century and into the 20th, advertising trade cards were the most ubiquitous form of commercial promotion." So one item she shared with me here is on the right, a very rare, quote, trade card, which appeared soon after the publication of The Hound of the Baskervilles in 1901. It was promoting a retail clothier in Troy, New York, which features a none too menacing looking pooch whose shadow casts the silhouette of Sherlock Holmes, end quote. Another example of Sherlockian ephemera is the photograph on the left here. This actually documents an ad for a play adaptation of the Holmes story, The Adventure of the Speckled Band, that was held in 1910. So in this case, it's ephemera of ephemera, which is to say it's a vernacular photo of a sign. Another fantastic collection of Sherlockian ephemera comes from Sonia Featherson, a collector based in Salem, Oregon. Sonia has almost 500 examples of greeting cards with Sherlockian themes, and they date back to as early as the 1890s. The cards span holidays and special occasions, Valentine's, Father's Day, Christmas, anniversaries, birthdays, and more. And they each use, as you can see, the iconography of Sherlock Holmes in their own unique way. Sonia says she first started collecting these when she saw people selling them to be cut apart for use in scrapbooks. And her dismay inspired her mission to start to collect and preserve as many of these as possible. Like many collectors, Sonia speaks with great passion about her preservation project, and she can get mighty competitive about it. So in our correspondence, she told me of her hunt for what she called, quote, an impossibly rare card I'd finally tracked down after several years of searching, end quote. So this card had appeared at an auction, an online auction. So she had kind of hunkered down online and was watching the proceedings hawkishly. And finally, the bidders are dropping away one by one until Sonia's finally competing with only one other person. And this is her words now, quote, I really wanted that card. And we went back and forth until the price was finally just too high for me. I reluctantly and miserably dropped out of the bidding war, and the other person won the card. I heaved a sigh, slowly made my way from my home office upstairs down to our family room. I told my husband I didn't get the card after all because some creep with deep pockets kept outbidding me. He chuckled and said, oops, I'm that creep. He'd wanted to surprise me with the card, and did he ever, end quote. Another kind of collecting that is generally considered adjacent to books, but that's still very much part of our literary heritage, is comic book collecting. Kashina Jade Kaneki, a collector based in Seattle, Washington, has a large section of comics in her wider Sherlockian collection. Comics can be the original stories in comic book form, but they can also be what are called pastiches by Sherlockians, that is, original works by new creators that draw inspiration from or otherwise feature Conan Doyle's characters. Pastiches are very similar to fan fiction, which is a genre composed by avocational writers creating original work within some other creator's existing world. Pastiches, on the other hand, are generally considered more professional productions. The middle of the Venn diagram between comics and fan fiction may be zines. I think this is my only non-Sherlockian slide, by the way. Zines are, by definition, self-published creations, often featuring work that is original to those creators, and it's meant for circulation within their own circles. These circles, too, are often groups of fandom for a specific band like The Clash, for a TV show like Star Trek, or for a literary group like Sherlockians. Zines are also defined by their method of creation. So because they're produced outside of professional publishing and often without a big budget, they're mostly created via some kind of cheap duplication process like Mimeo or photocopy. Today, the Art Book Fair held at Printed Matter in New York City famously has a zine tent for creators to come together and share their work. It's great. Linnea Dodson, a collector based in the Washington, D.C. area, collects zines of many kinds, but also Sherlockian zines. So you can see in these examples how format makes us reevaluate what we might consider a text. Linnea also collects fanfic. Fanfic is seeing increasing popularity thanks to online platforms like Archive of Our Own, aka AO3. While some argue that pastiches and fanfic are the same thing, I define fanfic personally as content produced without commercial gain, which is to say you don't get paid for it, whereas pastiches are generally published in exchange for payment. And so this definition has an effect on format too. That means most modern fanfic, at least, is born digital. It doesn't have a paper equivalent and lives only in online formats that are accessible via platforms like AO3. And for those of you who might instinctively feel that ebooks are not real books, I want to push back on this just a little bit with this example. Following the scholarship of book historians like Matt Kirschenbaum, I consider digital text to have a physicality just as print books do. So think about it. The physicality is very different, of course, but the iPhone you use to read on your Kindle app is a material object. The servers that keep our internet connections running are housed in physical locations. The ebook you think has no materiality can exist only because of an extremely complicated network of material platforms. And just ask Linnea, the complications of attempting to maintain a digital library of texts that have no print equivalent actually demonstrates how format makes an impression on texts and how to store them. This is a screenshot she shared with me. Linnea described to me some of the troubles she has faced in maintaining this collection of texts, which she reads on her Kobo e-reader. I'm going to give you a long quote that gives you a real sense. Quote, all collections have to be individually curated on each Kobo e-reader device. It won't remember that the story Lizards and Flatmates Should Know the Worst About Each Other belongs in the Sherlock Crackfic collection, for example. When I download things from AO3, I download them twice. Once into a stick this onto your Kobo folder on my laptop, and once into a these are all my Kobo fix sorted by category set of subdirectories that are also on the laptop, but then are backed onto an external drive. It's the only way I can think of, she says, to remove single points of failure if the Kobo or the laptop, or for that matter, the external drive ever die. Those backups are really important because while I resurrected some old self-EPUB stuff I had lost at one point, anything I downloaded straight from AO3 to iBooks that was then removed from AO3, this is a thing that happens, is simply gone. That's the end of the quote. You didn't have to keep up with all the details of that. The point is that these supposedly non-material texts require elaborate organization of their material means of storage and accessibility. So as you're beginning to see, there are many different reasons to collect, many different formats one can collect, and many different approaches to collecting one can take, all under the single umbrella of a subject these collectors are passionate about, Sherlock Holmes. The theme of Sherlock Holmes can also be a jumping off point to pursue related book collections. And the shortest jump might be something like Michael Mayers, a collector based in Switzerland. Michael collects books from Arthur Conan Doyle's own library. Cliff Goldfarb, whom you've already met, collector based in Toronto and my liaison for this lecture, with my earnest thanks. Cliff collects items not related to Conan Doyle's Sherlockian writings, but his Napoleonic ones. He has about 100 different editions of the novel Rodney Stone. One of the items he shared with me that I personally fell in love with is this notebook kept by Conan Doyle while he was researching the Napoleonic Wars. Steve Rothman, a collector based in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, collects works by Christopher Morley, a major literary voice of the first half of the 20th century, both as author and critic, and one of the founders of the Baker Street Irregulars, that is one of the most prestigious Sherlockian societies in the world. Now, even as I say this, without even being in the same room as you, I know there are Sherlockians across the world sighing in unison, remembering Steve's game of trying to connect any and everything to Morley in some fashion. He's even written a book about it. His collection includes original manuscripts by Morley, books inscribed by Morley, original lists of attendees to the meetings of the Baker Street Irregulars, and more. His collection also includes letters from Morley to another giant of Sherlockian history, Vincent Sterrett. Vincent Sterrett was an author born, in fact, in Toronto, but best known for his work living in Chicago. He wrote one of the foundational books for modern Sherlock Holmes fandom, The Private Life of Sherlock Holmes, a biography of the detective that was treated like nonfiction, which is now considered a sort of like proud tongue-in-cheek tradition of Sherlock Holmes societies. Ray Betzner, a collector based in Chester County, Pennsylvania, dominates the Vincent Sterrett realm in the way that Steve does for Morley. He has books from Sterrett's library, scrapbooks of Sterrett's reviews, and original manuscripts, including the original typescript of the Sonnet 221B, which is one of the most beloved pieces of Sherlockian writing in history. It begins, quote, "Here dwell together still two men of note, who never lived and so can never die." I love that. Anyway. Charles Prepelic, a collector based in Calgary, Alberta, went after the classic Holmes strands as well, but he soon ducked into a side path of science fiction and horror pastiches. Now, Charles makes a distinction in his own collection between traditional pastiches, that is, the ones that are set in the same time period and often trying to mimic the style of the original Holmes tales. He distinguishes those from what he calls Sherlock Holmes stories, which can veer widely across genres and lead to different atmospheres, plots, and tones. You can see in this picture, I love the little Sherlockian Cthulhu figure in the corner. Note here too, Charles makes a distinction that I, as one with less experience in pastiches, I don't make. And that's fine, and that's even good. Like, I'm offering guidance about different ways to collect here, but the larger theme is that you define your collection according to what you want to build. And so it's the existence of conscious parameters rather than what the parameters are themselves that makes a collection. In telling me about their book collections, many of those in this category of, let's call them Sherlock Holmes adjacent material, explained that a big part of their motivation was facing the expense of the Sherlock Holmes first editions. And so once again, we see creativity as the answer to an obstacle. Like, just look at all the interesting side paths these collectors found and all the original scholarship they created in the process. So for many collectors, the process is the point, the hunt and the research. Like, Ownership is great, but it's almost secondary to the experience of finally discovering something you've been looking for. And those collections that I've just gone over, they use homes as a jumping off point to explore other related interests. But another option is to use the theme of homes as a big umbrella and then get more specific within it. So we've already seen this a little bit when I've gotten some examples of varieties in format, like Sonia's greeting cards and Linnea's zines. But you can get specific in topic as well as format. So Kashina's comics and her wider collection focuses on creators who are Black, Indigenous, and other people of color. Mitch Higurashi, a collector based in Tokyo, Japan, has a collection of manga, that is to say Japanese graphic novels, but within that format, he's also narrowed it down by topic to parodies. Lee V, a collector based in California, collects examples of LGBTQ+ representation in Sherlockian works. Their collecting theme means they have examples across many different formats. And so here's yet another way that format can affect how you collect. When it comes to LGBTQ+ material, there are far more digital or self-published texts. These formats generally have fewer barriers to publication. One, they can sidestep the gatekeeping of traditional publishing. And two, thanks to platforms like AO3, they don't have to cost as much to make accessible. So are you beginning to see how paying attention to format actually creates like a key part of collecting? Texts are shaped in part by their format. It is in fact a key aspect of their existence. And it inevitably leads to interesting discoveries like in Lee's collection, a look behind the curtain to see how your favorite texts have come into existence. Beth Gallego, a collector based in Los Angeles, California, collects children's books with the Sherlockian theme. Again, here's a combination of two interests. Beth is not only a Sherlockian, but a children's librarian. Her collection includes straightforward adaptations of the original stories, but also entirely new ones, pastiches, graphic novels, toy books, works featuring Holmes as a human, and works featuring Holmes as a non-human. Think about just how many children's books have animals for protagonists, and you can see why. One discovery I liked about this collection is her observation that some classic stories get adapted more frequently than others, like Hound of the Baskervilles is a particular favorite. Hound of the Baskervilles is also the favorite story of Don Hobbs, a collector based in Flower Mound, Texas, who focuses on Holmes stories translated into other languages. Hobbs's collection is not only enormous, but wide-reaching. It's awe-inducing, frankly, to hear about the lengths that he's gone to in order to find some of these. Don has created an international network of Sherlockians who keep an eye on the ground for him from Japan to the Balkans. He told me one story of a Macedonian edition. Quote, this is straight from him. Quote, I found a website for the Macedonian Translators Union, and one name in particular jumped out to me, Tomi Memorovsky. This was also the name of a translator of the 1961 edition in Macedonian of The Adventures of Sherlock Holmes. There wasn't an email address and listed only a postal address. I wrote, not expecting much. So imagine my surprise when several months later, I had a reply from Tome using his granddaughter's computer. He said he was thrilled to be remembered after 40 years. He was retired and he didn't have a copy of the book, but he said, a Macedonian never forgets, and that he would find me a copy. 1 year passed before I had my next reply. Tome was still looking, but remember, he said, a Macedonian never forgets. Every year or so, I would receive another message saying, no luck in finding a copy, but a Macedonian never forgets. Finally, a message from Bella, Tome's granddaughter, came with the sad news that her grandfather had passed away, but not before he had found a copy of the book. Bella promptly sent it to me. All right, end quote. I love that story. In an entirely different vein, I'm just going to veer into a 180. There is one collection I had to share under the Holmes umbrella that may surprise some of you. Les Klinger, a collector based in Malibu, California, has many different Sherlockian collections, and he would, since he uses them in part for research while completing his mammoth editorial projects. But this collection is not for the faint of heart. It is Sherlockian pornography. For the purposes of this lecture, I asked Les to share with me just the safer work examples. You're welcome. So you can see how starting with a single theme like Sherlock Holmes can blossom into many different possibilities. And this can also extend book collecting into other forms of collecting around a literary figure. Greg Ruby, a collector based in Baltimore, Maryland, combined his two interests in numismatics and the great detective to become a Sherlockian coin collector. Among his items is a set of the 1994 Gibraltar coins, which depict scenes from famous Sherlock Holmes stories, including Hound from the Band of Baskervilles, the struggle of Holmes and Moriarty over Reichenbach Falls, Holmes playing the violin, and more. Conan Doyle was himself a coin collector, and Greg also has a coin owned by him. Enrico Solito, a collector based in Sesto Fiorentino, Italy, has documented his life as a Sherlockian through a collection of mementos created for Sherlockian events. And this is a particularly Italian thing, as he told me. He said it was very Italian to hang special commemorative dishes on one's wall as decoration. So here's a ceramic dish made in Gubbio, a city famous for its ceramics. And it was created specifically for Enrico as a thank you for presenting a series of lectures on Sherlock Holmes that he made during the city's traditional truffle festival. As part of this project, Enrico himself wrote a pastiche, by the way, an entirely new Holmes adventure that was set in Gubbio. And here's another rare dish that Enrico was presented for organizing an international meeting in his own city. At this meeting, Enrico argued that Holmes didn't visit Florence, but first Sesto Fiorentino. And in celebration, the city of Sesto made a bronze bust of Holmes that's now in the library of Sesto. And the director of the famous Ginordi porcelain actually made a limited series of 30 dishes commemorating it. Steve Doyle, a collector based in Indianapolis, Indiana, focuses on Sherlockian cinema, though the scope is slightly wider to include not only film and TV, but also stage and radio. It includes costume pieces, props, scripts, autographs of famous Sherlockian actors, and many unique and one-of-a-kind items. Steve told me that his collection started somewhat by accident when he had an incredible opportunity. He got to interview Jeremy Brett, who's the star of the Granada series of Sherlock Holmes. For those of you who haven't seen many television adaptations of Sherlock Holmes, suffice to say that there are bloody battles between the fans of the Granada series with Jeremy Brett and the fans of the BBC Sherlock series with Benedict Cumberbatch, though these fights exist in the first place because of the fundamental truth that both are terrific. Steve proudly told me that this here, this original calabash pipe used to film the Granada version of the story The Final Problem, still had Jeremy Brett's teeth marks on it. Now, many Sherlockians collect in order to inspire their own creations as well, as we've already seen, but there's something, I think, Holmes inspires creation. He just encourages others to create. So Jay Ganguly, a collector based in Patna, Bihar in India, considers herself a whimsical collector who seeks not only handmade material by fellow Sherlockians, but makes them herself, like this table mat. And while we're on the topic of Sherlockian objects, I haven't spoken yet much about institutional collections, but I just want to take a quick moment to show you some images of items from the University of Minnesota's collection provided by Timothy Johnson. Soap, timepieces, thimbles. Sherlockian iconography is so popular that it's hard to name a product that hasn't been advertised using it. Now, another popular angle of Sherlockian collecting, given the strength of the topic's iconography, is artwork. Jerry Margolin, a collector based in Portland, Oregon, is well known in Sherlockian circles for his single-minded pursuit of artwork depicting Sherlock Holmes. Jerry seeks examples in the traditional ways. He stalks eBay, makes connections with dealers, buys the collections of others, causes despair in those who dare to bid against him at auction, the usual ways. But he goes even further than that. He actually writes artists whose work he likes in order to commission original pieces by them with a Sherlockian theme. Now, here are a few examples, some well-known, some special commissions. I'm just showing here Dr. Seuss, Edward Searle, and of course, Sidney Paget, the artist for the original British Strand publications, whose works are considered the holy grail in this field. Nick Utekin, a collector based in Oxford, UK, also collects art that has a Sherlockian connection. He collects works that are not Sherlockian, but that are by artists who are better known for their Sherlockian art. As he told me, quote, This element of my collection began with the very early realization that I would never be able to afford an original Sidney Paget or Frederick Dorr Steele Holmes original drawing, end quote. Steele, by the way, illustrated a number of the first American editions of the Holmes stories, as opposed to the Paget's British issues. This is an example of how you can think creatively when you run into practical barriers. One of the smartest ways to collect is to think laterally about collecting, where you have fewer competitors, and therefore you will likely find lower prices. In collecting, you can even get philosophical about what defines art or an image. Lauren Messenger, a collector based in Seattle, Washington, collects Sherlockian themed perfumes and soaps that she calls, quote, vivid scent pictures. This collection began when Lauren stumbled upon a company called Black Phoenix Alchemy Lab, which sold scents named Sherlock Holmes and Dr. John H. Watson. The Holmes scent is, quote, a fastidiously clean scent with a dash of pipe and cigarette tobacco. Faintly beneath, you catch the fragrance of a smear of grease paint, stray horsehair, and a whisper of Moroccan leather and rosin, end quote. The Watson scent, on the other hand, smells like, quote, tweed and crisp linen, lime-tinged aftershave, the sleek steel and oil of a well-cared-for service revolver, and the echo of a Giselle bullet shell, end quote. As Lauren told me, quote, I love the creativity that goes into taking passages of a book and turning them into vivid scent pictures. It's just as much art as any of the illustrations that have been created for the text, end quote. So these examples demonstrate that collecting is a hobby that rewards passion and creativity, not simply people with deep pockets. And now that I've given you a tour of some of the wild and wonderful collections, I want to take a step back and consider why this matters. So first, I hope I've communicated that it matters simply because it brings these collectors joy. And that's no small thing, especially not in a year like 2020. Second, though, I believe that collectors play a critical role in preserving the documentation that we use in order to understand and interpret history. In fact, many of the most famous institutional collections of Sherlock Holmes material were built on a foundation of private collections that were donated or purchased. Oh, sorry, I meant to show you that other one. There we go. I mentioned University of Minnesota's collection briefly, but it's somewhat wrong to call it a single collection. It's chiefly comprised, in fact, of many different collections built by individual collectors, like, for example, John Bennett Shaw's legendary library of approximately 9,000 books. Sonia Featherstone, the Sherlockian greeting card collector that I mentioned before, has already promised her collection to the University of Minnesota, where it will be accessible for future scholars to research. And Don Hobbs's massive collection of over 8,000 translations is now at Southern Methodist University in Dallas. And of course, as you already saw, the Toronto Public Library's collection is built on a foundation of what the Friends of the Arthur Conan Doyle Collection call the Four Pillars, the collections of Arthur Bailey, S. Tupper Bigelow, Harold Mortlake, and Nathan L. Bingus. As an aside, there are collectors who instead disperse their material back onto the market, and that's another path chosen in the hopes of bringing the same joy to other collectors that they experience when they track down some rare thing. A number of the collectors I spoke to for this lecture told me about items they had acquired from a 2017 auction of Dan Poznansky's collection. For example, Dan particularly sought piracies, just as Glenn Maranker does. In the catalog for that auction, Glenn reminisced, quote, armed with photocopies and notes, we'd go on foot or by taxi to address after address, fortified by food from Katz's Deli. Spending time with a gifted collector can rub off. I call it the Poznansky effect. So Glenn's memory also demonstrates my final point about the value of collecting, which is that collections connect us. I already told you the story of Don Hobbs corresponding with the Macedonian who never forgets. And one person I spoke with, Diego A. Moreno Obando, a collector based in Lima, Peru, first got interested in collecting Holmes material because his grandfather was a fan and kept them in his library. And he had these fond memories of watching his grandfather read on his couch. Peter Blau has described John Bennett Shaw as a mentor in his collecting. That was a shared passion that led to many pleasant hours together. And Jen Aker, who I mentioned collects by serendipity, she also admitted that the other way she increases her editions of Hannah of the Baskervilles is via gifts from friends who know what she collects. And Kashina Jade Konecki, whom I already mentioned, collects Sherlockian material created by Black, Indigenous, and other people of color. She's working on a related research project. What she's trying to do is to connect Sherlockians who are Black, Indigenous, and other people of color with a goal to, quote, learn what draws them to Sherlock Holmes in the community, end quote. Kashina is the vice president of Seattle's Sherlock Holmes Society, the Sound of the Baskervilles, and invites anyone interested in her project to contact her. Even in the process of preparing this lecture on collecting, I was introduced to so many new people who share the same joy in Sherlock Holmes that I do. So I want to thank all the collectors who provided material for this lecture to be possible, as well as everyone who signal boosted for me or gave me referrals, notably Richard Olkin, and also Rob Nunn, who provided referrals to individuals he had connected with while editing an upcoming anthology on book collecting, or not even book collecting, on Sherlockian collecting, called The Finest Assorted Collection. Now that is scheduled for release in 2022. Keep an eye out. The only regret I have is that I didn't have time to talk about each in further detail because they're all full of stories. Many of them have told these stories on other platforms like I Hear Sherlock Everywhere, the podcast from Scott Monty and Bert Walder. So I do encourage you to seek those out, in addition to keep an eye out for Rob Nunn's upcoming anthology. And Scott and Bert, if you're listening, there may be a few more potential podcast guests among the collectors that I've highlighted, and happy to connect you. So to end, I will share the story of a Sherlockian book that passed through my hands via an unexpected connection. A number of years ago, Denny Dobry had invited me and my family on a tour of his 221B flat. He and his wife Joanne were prepared for our visit. They had Sherlock Holmes versions of Wishbone and Scooby plushies ready as gifts for my young children. And while I was there, I purchased a book that had been donated to the BSI Trust, the Baker Street Regulars Trust, for fundraising. It was created by John Rule. He was a Sherlockian in Berkeley who printed his own pastiches in his garage below his house, binding them by hand. And this one, it was bound in his favorite Hawaiian shirt. There it is. When it comes to Sherlockian collecting, the possibilities are endless. So this short tour is really just the beginning. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Rebecca. That was amazing. I want to recognize we have a few questions, and I will read them out. And the first one is actually, I think it's quite interesting, is how can you tell if a book is a pirated edition?
Well, the short answer is you just have to do a little bit of research into the publishing history of the time and whether the publisher that you're seeing on the title page is the one who authorized and got the contract for Doyle. And there's been enough research on this that this is very findable. And essentially, if it's not the one authorized publisher, then you know that some random publisher in Boston or whatever, you're like, okay, that's someone who just stole it.
There's actually a famous story of Conan Doyle when he was on one of his American tours being given a copy of one of his books to sign, and it was a pirated edition. And one of the people who described today has that book with what Conan Doyle wrote in it. Another, it's not so much a question, but one of your admirers writes that you haven't mentioned the fine collection of Jenny Payton, who has the largest collection of video and film in the world.
Well, you know, I didn't mention many collections. I am actually very proud of myself for covering 31 collections in 40 minutes. However, this is very much meant to be like tip of the iceberg. I want to give people a sense of the range of what's out there, but in fact, really the possibilities are endless.
Yeah, I'm looking for, so can you tell us a little bit about the process that you use to gather your collection of collections?
So the process had a lot to do with, as I mentioned at the end, it's just about connecting people. And I have been a Sherlockian myself. Cliff mentioned some of my Sherlockian Society participation, and it starts with that. You know, you meet people there. I originally got interested in Sherlockian societies specifically because going to these events at the societies were so, it was always so welcoming, so warm and welcoming. It was like a intellectual but also jovial atmosphere where people were always really kind and sort of immediately welcomed you into the family. So, you know, the first step in this was, besides, you know, as a rare book dealer, there are a number of people I know who are collectors. And so I sort of start with the people I already have on my list. And then from there, it's just a question of reaching out as much as possible. And one of the things I really tried to do in this was push outside of my own immediate networks to try to show a great range, because I mean, that's another thing. It's very easy just to like throw your friends up there. But in fact, as I said, I met a lot of people through this process, and that was sort of a gift I gave myself.
Another question, and I kind of agree with this. Were you surprised at how many different varieties of collections there are out there when you started this?
No. I wasn't, I mean, I'm a rare book dealer. This is what I do professionally. I have seen many, many different collections. I've seen, you know, of course, the things people think of first editions, but, you know, I knew a guy who just collected any book that mentioned elephants. So truly, like, collectors are really endlessly creative. In my opinion, collecting is eccentricity made material. That's my quote, eccentricity made material. So no, I actually expect that I'm going to see creativity and variety. And that's the thing I want to communicate into that, is that it's not just those headline ground being like, oh, Shakespeare First Folio went for so much money, and oh, you see Walt Whitman's Leaves of Grass and the books we all know. Most collecting that happens is in fact this more creative or unusual collecting, because most of us just can't afford to do that high headline grabbing type of collecting.
Yeah. When I finally admitted to myself that I was a collector, I tried to figure out, I finally did, I divided the world into two categories. There's people who collect and people who don't. And for people who collect, no explanation of why you collect is necessary. And for people who don't collect, no explanation of why you collect is possible. I always said that.
There does seem to be a sort of like, you walk in and you see someone's collection and you're like, oh, okay, I get that. You know, maybe you collected stamps as a kid, or I collected, you know, rocks, minerals, and you know, that's I think a very human instinct. And some people are just not like that. They are minimalists in a way that I am not. And that's fine too. Like, you do you. I think the whole point of collecting is that people, as I say, they pursue it because it brings them joy. It's a hobby that they can actively pursue that pleases them. And it doesn't have to please everyone. But if you're that type of person, then like, I want to say, like, don't sort of shut yourself off to the possibility of collecting because you have a false idea of what it is.
Absolutely. Someone from Australia wants to know, thank you for your presentation, and has just started collecting and wants to know your view of searching out secondhand bookstores.
Well, I am in non-COVID times, I'm very pro spending time in secondhand bookstores. One of the things that you get in spending time with looking at a lot of books and getting books passing through your hands is you get what we kind of in the business, and we're a book business as a bookseller, we call a book sense. And you get a really clear sense of, oh, I've seen this kind of book a million times, it's actually not very scarce. Or, oh, this is actually a really great condition copy for this book because I've already seen 20 copies. That book sense really comes from experiential hands-on learning. It's something when people ask me, like, how do you become a rare book dealer? And I have to explain that, you know, there's not really a school to do it. There are seminars like the Antiquarian Book Seminar, CABS, but really it's more like an apprenticeship, because you have to spend the time with the material. Just a quick anecdote related to that. I remember when I was first hired into the rare book firm that got me into the business, David Bowman at Bowman Rare Books, he told me, you are going to spend, you know, 3 to 5 years really getting a handle on this. It's like getting a graduate degree. And I was like, yes, sir. Yes, sir. And in my head, I was like, I'm going to stay up late and read a lot, and I'm going to work really hard and study. And it's only going to take me 2 years. And in fact, he was right, because you can't sort of fast forward the hands-on experience part. It really is that apprenticeship type model. And that is what you get from visiting secondhand bookshops. So if you're big into collecting or you want to learn about collecting, I would encourage you to visit bookshops, visit book fairs, and just see as much material as you can.
I agree with that. I spent many happy hours in bookshops, and I know a lot of the other people that you named have as well.
Yeah, and it's fun on top of that, so.
Yeah. Well, this has been really wonderful. I want to mention to everyone that this lecture has been recorded, and it will be on our YouTube channel, which we have just opened. It will take a few days to get there, but please visit our website, acdfriends.org, and you can get connected to our Facebook page, our YouTube channel, and most importantly, to the wonderful collection we have. And I might add, virtually everything that you showed today that is Sherlockian in nature is represented in the collection. And I know many of the people that you've mentioned have done lots of research and worked in that collection, as well as in Minneapolis and more latterly in Portsmouth. And they are, I mean, my happiest days were being locked up in the old ACD room and sitting there for an afternoon researching, and it's wonderful, and I encourage everyone to visit when you can visit. Well, thank you, Rebecca. This has been, I think, one of the most interesting lectures we've ever had. I think probably it made a lot of collectors feel much better to know that we're not alone, and that as quirky as our collections might be, someone else's is quirkier. So thank you very much. And we're really looking forward to this will be published as a pamphlet, and I'm kind of wondering how we will ever duplicate the style, but it will be as best as we can. So thank you again. Welcome to everyone who came, and goodbye.
Thanks, Cliff. Goodbye.